everyone. Welcome to today's live. Hello, hello. We are talking about shame today, and hope you're all doing well. This topic of shame, um, I would love to start by just defining a bit of what it is and talking about ways that it might be negatively impacting our lives, and then how to, what to do about it, what to do about shame. And with every one of these topics that I do every second and fourth Saturday of the month, we're always looking at, whatever it is, for example, shame, we're always looking at, how is this impacting me? Because there's a lot of emotions like shame that we could just immediately label as um, unhelpful or something I shouldn't be experiencing, or if I am feeling shame, I'm doing something wrong, and all these things. And it's always so important to remember that, um, we experience the spectrum of emotions all the time. We're going to continue to feel shame in some form, in some way. Um, every emotion is of itself not good or bad. It is it's part of being human. So whenever I go on and talk about, like, let's get rid of shame, I always want to have a bit of a caveat, to acknowledge that experiencing some shame isn't a problem. I don't think it's a problem, right? What we want to look at is are we fueling it? Like, are we staying in shame, and or what are we doing to ourselves or in our lives or to others when we're in feeling some shame? Those are the things that we want to kind of look at and consider whether this is impacting us negatively in our life. Um, all right, so what is shame? Let's just quickly ground around a common definition of this. The feeling of being wrong, and I would extend that to say that you ultimately are making that mean something about your worth. And so when we're feeling shame in the way that I want to talk about it, it is like, um, I was not able to follow through on one of my obligations or commitments to another person because of my physical limitation, and therefore I'm worthless. Um, are you taking it to that extreme? So that's like the first question. Like, how often is this happening? Um, if you want to share your thoughts on that, please do in the comments. Like, how often do you find yourself going to that level of response? Because, it might be that for the most part, there's things you'd like to do that you can't fully do because of you're being impacted by physical limitation in some way, and you might just be experiencing some disappointment, uh, some disappointment in yourself, or wishing you could do more, or disappointment in others if it's their physical limitation that's impacting you in some way, and maybe you're not taking it to this level of then making it mean that you have no worth, you know. Um, And so that's the first thing, just again, to be aware of. It's like, how much am I really experiencing shame? Maybe it's not something you're experiencing that much. Um, one way to know that you are is if you find yourself wanting to hide in some way, right? That's a very simple and I think relatively accurate measure of shame. Am I wanting to hide myself or something I did? Um, And if that's the case, then you are likely experiencing some shame around the thing, making it mean that you have no worth, and it's got to be hidden. You don't want anyone to know about it because it will, if they learned about the thing you did, or a thing that you thought, then they will also know of your little worth. They will also start to view you as worthless. Um, so that's a bit of the definition. And shame, when you experience it at its core, can be really painful. Um, it can be a painful emotion when you are really in that belief that you are of no worth. And whenever we experience a negative emotion like that, first of all, it's, even though it can feel terrible in your body, always practice reassuring yourself that you are safe. This is one of the most impactful things to people with chronic pain, and something I experienced for a long time, is feelings of, or a sense of danger, a sense of, yeah, uh, experiencing threats in some way. And a lot of that came from viewing negative emotions as dangerous. And when you view a negative emotion as dangerous, then you send your body into even more like fight or flight type of response that can make any physical pain you might be experiencing even worse, right? Um, and so a negative emotion can be painful in the way that it feels in your body and safe, right? You might be feeling some intense negative emotion, and shame can feel intense, but the truth is, when you are experiencing an emotion, you are perfectly safe. You're not in danger, and nothing has gone wrong. You are a human experiencing human emotions, and shame is one of them. uh, all right. So, um, I want to share maybe two ways that shame has shown up for me, and then a little bit about, of course, what we do about it. Okay, so one way that I experienced shame, and it was not just a one particular experience. It was more like a view of myself in general, and I had this view for many years because of my chronic pain and my rheumatoid arthritis, and especially when I had children. And the view of myself was that I'm not enough. Um, that's it. It's as simple as that. Um, I'm not enough. You know, I defined shame earlier as like I'm worthless. I'm not enough is also a version of that. And day in and day out, I uh, would feel like my ability to interact with my kids, my ability to show up, my ability to be a father was just not enough because of my pain. And I had limitations on what I could do. And um, and this is just a recurring story every day. I'm not enough. And so I want to just say something about this before I move on to the next example. Um, when that if you have a view of yourself like that, this is kind of with you every day, um, you likely may not be fully aware of it, right? It might not be very evident, and you might not be in like intense feelings of shame, but there will be almost like a lull, like um, an underlying shame that's just with you all the time. And and this this I might categorize it also as a bit of a chronic cycle of shame. Um, it's happening over and over and all the time. And there's a difference in, so here's the difference I want to point out. There's a the thing that we want to take a look at and view as different parts is behavior, right? Which in this case for me, it was saying no to my kids when they wanted to when they wanted to go play basketball or a sport or something that had physical involvement. I often am was saying no for many years. This has changed now. Actually, my life now is a little bit different because of all the work that I've done, all these tools that I've been able to really access and deploy in my life. Um, but for a good period of time, for many, at least 10 years, um, or the 8 years of my oldest son's life, for many of those years, I'm saying no to any physical activity. So that's the behavior. And separate from that is the story that I'm not enough. Then that story that I'm not enough is the thing that was creating kind of this lull, this like chronic emotion of shame. So notice that the behavior wasn't creating the shame. The behavior was um, my son asked me to go play basketball. I say no. That is doesn't create emotion. That is just a behavior and a choice also because of my chronic pain and because of my physical state, I would choose not to engage in a physical activity. That just is behavior. The shame side of things came from the story that because I had to say no, I therefore am not enough. I'm not a good enough dad. Um, so notice those differences. That is so critical in working through these experiences and understanding what causes shame. Shame is an emotion that comes from a story or comes from something you're thinking. It does not come from a behavior. It doesn't come from things you do or don't do. Shame does not come from things you say or don't say. Shame comes from your story. And my story was that because I'm saying no to my son, I am not enough. I'm not a good enough dad. And that, for so many years, was the story that created shame. So that's one thing, that's the first thing to be aware of when you are navigating your life. If you are impacted by physical limitation or by someone else's physical limitation, is separating your behavior or their behavior from the story. Okay, the um, the second experience that is a bit more recent, and I actually mentioned this before, but I'm going to share it again briefly. My daughter just had surgery for cochlear implants. She's deaf, and she had cochlear implants for both ears, and the surgery was 2 weeks ago. And leading into that surgery, uh, we had the decision to give her this relaxant and this medication to um, make the transition from us to the operating room um, a more pleasant experience for her. She could relax and um, have less anxiety around that. For her little three-year-old brain that couldn't fully comprehend what was going on. Um, and so we did make that decision to give her this medication. Well, it had a reverse effect. It actually did not relax her at all. It did the exact opposite. And this doesn't happen with all children, um, but the nurse and doctors reassured us that this does occasionally happen. Sometimes there's an opposite effect of the medication, and that was the case. And so this happened, and so our daughter was just she was very not herself. She was fearful. She was anxious. She was all the things that we were hoping she wouldn't have to experience. Um, Side note, the other good part, at least that we have learned and maybe is true, and we haven't heard our 3-year-old daughter ever like talk about this since the surgery, but maybe that medication also um, prevents your memory from that time. Like you have no memory of that time when you're on the medication. So maybe she doesn't remember this. But anyway, the point of the story is that when that happened, um, I went to a place of shame really quickly. right afterward, I was just like, oh my word, that was the wrong decision, you know? Um, and I shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have done that. Me and my wife, like ah, that was just the wrong thing. And I'm a terrible parent. I, I created that negative experience for my daughter, and I just had so much guilt and shame. And so here it is again. This story illustrates the same, like the similar concept. We have a decision, right? The decision was, let's give her some of this medication. Um, and we also have an outcome in this case, right? A decision and an outcome. The decision to give her medication, the outcome was this negative effect of the medication where she was fearful and anxious and all these things. The shame and the guilt didn't come from the decision and the outcome, it came from my story about it. When I went into the story that we shouldn't have done that, that was the wrong thing, we should have known better, that's what created the shame and the guilt. So those two examples illustrate this key component of how to break this down, how to understand what you're experiencing, and to differentiate the behavior or the thing from your story about the thing. And the story about the thing is the thing creating the shame. All right. Um, so what do we do about this? How do we navigate our experiences knowing that we have these experiences, these decisions and behaviors, and real limitations and all these things, and we have real emotions? And just because it's a story, just because the story is creating the emotion, doesn't mean it's not valid. It's always valid whenever we're experiencing an emotion. It's always perfectly valid. And so when I had this kind of chronic situation and recurring emotion of shame, perfectly valid and real, and it was impacting me in every way. And this scenario that I just shared with my daughter, my daughter's surgery, also perfectly valid. Um, so, so the first question to ask is, in these moments, how do I want to respond to myself? How do I want to care for myself when I'm experiencing shame? Because we can at some point possibly experience less shame as you increase your awareness of it. But to eliminate entirely, that may not ever be the case. We can get rid of some shame, but likely not all of it. So, how do you want to care for yourself? How do you want to respond to yourself when you're experiencing shame? That's a question for you to ask and to get clear on and to decide ahead of time. You can determine now, hey, when I'm in those moments where I am feeling like I'm not enough or that I'm worthless, how do I want to care for myself? And I'll share with you the answer I have for myself. And this might not be the same for you. You determine what might make sense for you and how you want to care for yourself in those moments. But I have decided, and this is what I've practiced for many times over and over, is when I'm in shame, when I'm in a deep negative emotion, and it feels painful, it's like that moment when I left my daughter after she had been in this terrible state from this medication. I was just like, it just felt um, yucky, right? It just did not feel good. I was just like, oh my goodness, that was the wrong thing, right? And so, how do I care for myself in that moment? My answer to that question is love. I want to love on me so much when I'm in that moment, when I'm feeling shame. And I like to view myself as a child who is doing their best, but also is in some ways ignorant, perhaps not fully informed, or maybe lacking sufficient experience. or um, just falling short in some way, right? Like childlike in terms of like inexperience or um, learning by failure, right? And I'm like, oh, I uh, I made a decision in this case for my daughter, like didn't work out well, and I then am experienced this shame, and so then I respond to myself with love, like as if I am talking to a 5-year-old. I'm like, listen, um, you couldn't have known that she was going to react that way to that medication, and I understand that you're feeling some shame and some guilt right now. Let me hold you. I mean, that's how we would respond to a 5-year-old. Maybe, or maybe not. That's how I would like to respond to a 5-year-old, and that's how I want to respond to myself. So that's what I practice when I am in shame or guilt. I'm like, hey, let me hold you. Um, and so this might be how you want to respond to yourself, or not, or in different ways. Maybe there's a variation of this, of how you want to respond to yourself and take care of yourself when you're experiencing shame. So what might that look like for you? Okay, that's the one question to ask, or one thing to explore when we're navigating our lives with physical limitations and these emotions like shame. Um, the second thing and final thing I just want to discuss related to this is how I'm actually going to offer that um, love is a powerful tool to reduce shame. Again, it won't reduce it entirely. We might likely have shame all throughout our lives, right? But I just want to share the response from Jesus when he was asked by um, the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they asked him, saying, "Hey, uh, Jesus, what is the great commandment in the law?" I'm reading this from Matthew 22. Jesus said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these two commandments hang the law and the prophets. So these are often referred to, of course, as the um, the two great commandments, or the great commandment. Um, but there's three components here. There's three components in these two commandments: loving God, loving others, loving yourself. The thing that I love about this, no pun intended, the thing I love is that you, by practicing love uh, for one of those three components, or I'd say one of those three people, right? God, another person, or yourself. By practicing love toward one of those people, you increase your capacity to love the two others. If I practice loving God more, I increase my capacity to love others and to love myself more. Or if I practice loving myself more, I increase my capacity to love others and to love God more. And if I practice loving another person, I increase my capacity to love myself more and to love God more. It is so powerful how we can practice loving one person, and that practice increases our capacity to love others or ourselves more. So it's such a beautiful tool. Um, it's such a beautiful practice. And if the root of shame is a view that you are unworthy, or that you are worthless, or that you are not enough, the antidote to that can be love, right? Loving that part of you that believes you might not be enough. Um, and as you love that part of you that believes you're not enough, you will gently reduce the pain, reduce um, the intensity of shame that you experience. And so you can practice this. So the way that I have practiced this is actually with all three. I always am thinking about all three of these people: God, or another person, or myself. And at times, so these three people are such a part of our day to day experience. And at times, we're interacting more with God. And we have an opportunity in that moment to practice loving God even more. At other times, we might be interacting a whole lot with another person. It could be a spouse, or it could be a family member, it could be a neighbor, or it could be a work colleague. At times in our day, we're interacting a whole lot with another person. And that can be an opportunity to practice love for that person. And at other times, we might be a bit more hard on ourselves, or we have an experience that's creating some shame, and that is an opportunity to love ourselves. No matter which person you're interacting with, know that as you practice love toward that person, you're increasing your capacity to extend love to the other people as well. And through this process, decrease the pain that you might experience from shame. Um, it is such a beautiful experience to practice loving. One of the things that I've been doing recently is especially practicing love for people who seem to be um, ignorant of my situation, or people who seem to be disregarding my experience, or people who are asking questions that seem unthoughtful. Um, People who are interacting with me in a way that is really easy for me to judge or criticize. Those interactions are the best teachers. Those interactions are the best practice we could ask for, the best scenario we could ask for to increase our capacity to love. Because when it's something that is imperfect, that's where love is really required, right? Or compassion. I've also been exploring recently really how compassion feels differently than love. I generally experience them very similarly. So when I say love, and the way I've been talking about it now, um, compassion comes through. You know, compassion and love are very close, in terms of, I think, how I experience them as emotions in my body, and then what happens in my words or my actions toward another when I'm feeling compassion or I'm feeling love. And so when we can practice compassion or love for another or for God, we increase our capacity to love ourselves and to have compassion for ourselves. Because when we're in shame, we are recognizing our own imperfection, where we maybe did something we wish we hadn't done, or we feel like we are falling short, or we feel like, yeah, we just did something wrong. And so that, again, is a similar scenario where we can practice. So shame is thinking that because we did something wrong, we're not enough. But if we can get to a place where we do something that we perceive as wrong, and we have compassion and love for ourselves in that, then we reduce our suffering. And so as we practice that toward others who are showing up in ways that are easy to criticize and easy to judge them for, we increase our capacity to now extend that same compassion and love to ourselves when we are showing up in ways that are easy to judge or to be critical of. So that's where I'm going to leave us with today's topic on shame, and might I add, love and compassion. I hope you are doing well, If you have any questions, please feel free to comment and interact. Appreciate your community as always as we support one another and find really all the ways we can live abundantly despite the way we're being impacted by physical limitations. So have a wonderful rest of the day and see you again soon. Bye, everyone.